This is a one-speaker meeting. Please welcome our speaker tonight, Joe.
All right. Move the stool.
Let's try to find this.
A use for the book.
Hi, my name's Joe Fitzgerald. I'm an alcoholic. And, oh God, I'm just glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm glad I don't have a pair of new heels on and get room by that little stool. In fact, I may take it later when I stand on Sunset Boulevard around 2:30 in the morning. I can't do that anymore. I'm too old. You know, I look like an old hooker. You know what I mean? It's, you know, if you're new in AA, you know, I got to tell you, alcohol and drugs and whatever I had to do here worked. It worked real well. You know, I found medicine. Do we have any empty seats? Is there any empty seats in this room? Yours. No. Oh, if someone come up here and take my seat. You know, come up here. You need a seat, anybody? I hate standing. You know, I stood so much when I was drinking. You know what I mean? And I laid down a lot, too, passed out, you know, here, there, everywhere. Anyway, I love being sober. You know, if you're new in AA, the name of the game is, you know, it's one day at a time. And the best thing that I've done for 35 years, I got sober March 27th, 1975. I was only 5 years old, unfortunately, you know. There's a lot of old people in this room, but not me. Anyway, I was 33 years old, you know, and it was over, you know, finally. When I finally cried out that, and I think we all cry out. I cried out other times, but that last time I cried out. It was around 3:30 in the morning. I went back to my apartment in West Hollywood. I'd closed the bars. I'd been on the streets. And I looked in the mirror, and I hope I never forget it. I had a lot of mirrors in those days. I don't have too many mirrors nowadays. They're smoked. I have them smoked. You know what I mean? But I remember looking in that mirror, and my face was blood red. I was about 85 pounds. I had real long hair in those days. And I looked in that mirror, and I said, God, someone help me. And my father had died 8 months earlier. And I thought of my dad. I know he's up there somewhere with my Irish grandmother, Sadie, the woman I loved the most, and my Uncle John, his brother, who died of cirrhosis of the liver when I was in high school. I remember when Uncle John died. I said, Dad, Gram, Uncle John, please help me. I think I'm losing my mind or having a nervous breakdown. And I went to bed around 4 in the morning, and I woke up, and I was a house cleaner in those days. I still am. I've been doing it for 40 years. And I went to my first client in the Valley, and she walked out of the kitchen, and they had wall phones in those days. And I picked up the wall phone, and I called AA, and I have never had a drink or a drug since then. It's a miracle. You know, and I went to my first AA meeting on Thursday. This was Wednesday morning. Anyway, so I love AA, you know. And anyway, I was born February 12th, 1942. You know, I was 33 when I got here. On February 12th, I celebrated my 68th birthday. Don't I look fabulous for a senior citizen? Look at, no belly, slim and trim. Well, I have one of those things they sell on TV. It just holds you in. Oh, my God. I got 4 pairs of pantyhose on. That holds it all in. One pair that pads you in the right place to make everything look good. You know what I mean? And, you know, if you have any trouble staying sober, start wearing pantyhose. You know what I mean? Maybe a few men need a pair of pantyhose. You know what I mean? Anyway, you'll think about it. Anyway, so, born February 12th, 1942. What time's this meeting over, at 10? God forbid we should stay too long. Right, anyway, February 12th, 1942, I was born in Chicago. You know, I have an older brother and a younger sister, and I don't know. I think basically, I think when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't know a lot about a lot of stuff. And I believe that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I learned a lot about myself. You know, I learned a lot about myself. And, you know, I have an older brother and a younger sister, and now that I realize I was an alcoholic, you know, I was 4.5 pounds. My mother said, you could not wait. I was premature. And now that I realized that I was an alcoholic, when I started thinking about my drinking and my, you know, being born and all that, I thought, No wonder why I couldn't wait. You know, I was 4.5 pounds. I just wanted to get out of there. You know, I had a lot I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to get out of there. My father worked on the railroad. I was present at my birth. You know, I remember my father was standing there. I have an older brother and younger sister, and he worked on the railroad. And I still remember, how he used to open those railroad coveralls, because they were so starched that he would have to put his hand in and, you know, spread the legs and all that. And I remember I was present at my birth. You know, big eyes. And I remember my father was standing as railroad head. He has his coveralls. He was so excited because he's going to have another boy, and one day he'll have his own baseball team. And the reality is, in the 40s, remember, babies were born a little different. My mother said, you could not wait. And my mother said, when I come flying out, the only difference between me and my brother, and that's the way it was, I had a big pink bow in my hair. And that was not popular in the 40s, you know? And my father was not pleased to see that pink bow. And my mother said, you lived up to the expectations of that pink bow, because I became a very pretty little boy, and pretty was not in those days. God gave me real big eyes and real long eyelashes. He gave me a high-pitched voice, and I wore long dresses and heels, and I would twirl a lot, you know. And I still remember my father coming home from working on the railroad, and he'd always look out in the prairie, and my brother was always playing baseball, and he'd look on the floor, and my sister was always playing with her little dolls, and he'd look at me, and I was always in full drag, just twirling around, you know. And, you know, my father would come in one door, and he would actually go out the other door. And I thought, God, what's wrong with my father, you know? And when I got to AA, I remember I told my sponsor, I said, I think I drove my father to alcoholism. And she said, you did not. Your father became an alcoholic because he was an alcoholic. So trust me, the way I looked and the way I sounded in the 40s, it created a lot of problems for me in school. And, you know, and it's just the way it is. I believe, being an alcoholic, that I think when we look back on our lives, I think most of us are pretty strong. We're strong people. God has created some strong people to get us through a lot of things we're going to have to do before we get here. And, you know, and in my case, I think it all started in the very beginning, you know, and pretty was not in, and I was, you know, in the old days, remember, girls did not wear makeup, and not the good girls anyway, and I was prettier than most of the girls, you know. It drove my father crazy. You know, people would come up to my parents and say, oh, it's a shame. It's a shame he's a boy because he's so pretty. They didn't know how I looked at home with dresses and twirling around, you know, and whatever. So anyway, school was not one of my favorite things, but, you know, I had to go to school, and we always went to Catholic school, and I'm grateful for that. And, you know, anyway, and I'm that little boy that, you know, my parents actually got divorced when I was in 5th grade. And we moved and we had a lot of fun. You know, we were all poor. A lot of people were poor in those days. And we moved from the north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago. My parents got divorced. And I'm that little boy in the 5th grade on the north side of Chicago, because nobody ever told me I had to go to work, but I knew if you wanted any extras in life, you had to go to work. I think I bought my first 3-wheeler. You know what I mean? That's just the way it was, and it has nothing to do. My parents made a lot of sacrifices to give me the best they could. And remember, there were 3 of us. And I'm that little boy that got a paper out in the 5th grade. And when we moved to the south side of Chicago, what happened? Oh, there's a green FO parked in the surf shop, parking lot next door. Anyone got a green car? It's being towed by 2 tow trucks. They're taking one end and one way and one end the other way. Oh my God, what is that all about? Yeah, don't park there, yeah. 2 tow, God, oh God. Anyway, I'm glad I didn't bring my Bentley and put it over there. Anyway, so the reality is, where was I? Between the tow trucks, oh my dear. Anyway, I'll have that later, thanks. The reality is, when we moved to the south side of Chicago, you know, no one told me I had to get a job, but it's just the way it was. You know, and I got a job. In the 5th grade, I got a paper route. We moved to the south side of Chicago. I got another paper route. And through a series, after a while, I actually got a job at the A&P supermarket carrying groceries. Thursday night, and I remember I'm in grammar school, Thursday night, Friday night, and all day on Saturday. And when I look back on that, I made a lot of money. And I'm that little boy You know, my self-loathing was so bad that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 33 years old, remember, I was unsuccessful at suicide. I had tried a lot of suicide. Thank God. The worst suicide was an overdose of pills and a lot of booze. I came home and took all the pills around 3 in the morning. And I went to bed, and I didn't show up at the beauty shop that day. And for some reason, they knew something was up, and they came to my West Hollywood apartment. I worked in Beverly Hills. They broke the goddamn door down, and I still remember them getting me out of bed and making me put clothes on. They dragged me out of that apartment, put me in a car, brought me down to Beverly Hills. They walked me for one day up and down the alley, and I kept saying, I remember everything was just kind of hazy, and I remember they gave me coffee, and it was spilling on me, and there was always someone in between comb outs. The shampoo people would come out. There was always someone on one arm and the other arm, and I kept saying, let me sit down. No, keep walking. And they walked me for one day up and down. I mean, they saved my life. They really did. And I hope I'll never forget it. You know, those are things that happen before we get here. So anyway, I'm that little boy that, you know, start carrying groceries. And, you know, the reality is I've always wanted better things in life. And I'm that little boy that looked around that little townhouse at the Bridgeport Housing Projects and thought, we don't have a lot of stuff, really. And it had nothing to do with my family. And I'm that little boy that walked into 32nd Major Appliance on 32nd and Halsted, and I walked up, and I'm in grammar school. I learned about credit. I mean, I can't believe it, but I walked up to the man and I said, I want to buy my mother something. What do I have to do? And he said, you make payments, and then I'll give it to you. And I thought, you know, that sounds like a good idea. So the first thing I bought was a pop-up toaster. We did not have a toaster. We used to actually put the toast on top of the stove, you know, and brown it. And the next thing I bought was a kitchen table and 6 chairs, all chrome and formica. It looked fabulous. And then I bought end tables, lamps, and a coffee table. And, you know, that pink bow worked real well. You know what I mean? And I eventually bought my mother Melmac dinnerware because she was breaking all the real dishes. So my father would come over periodically. You know, my father was a great guy, but it was not a good match for both of them. And the reality, he'd bring groceries and she'd, oh my dear. Yeah, thank God I know where I'm at. When that thing went down, it made me a little nervous. But anyway, thank God I don't have to go through any of that anymore, you know what I mean? But the reality is, you know, and I'm that little boy that came home on Saturday with, you know, ground sirloin instead of ground beef, and butter instead of margarine, fruits and vegetables and whatever, you know. And really, basically what I did a lot of that stuff, cleaned house a lot and whatever. You know, my mother had a lot of her own problems, and but the reality is, I think too, I wanted them to say they loved me more, you know, really, in a way, and they were totally incapable. I still remember crawling on the floor. I used to crawl on the floor, and my mother laid on the couch a lot. And I remember my mother was cold, you know, and I loved my mother, but she was cold. She didn't know how to hold you. And, you know, like Grandma Fitzgerald, when my grandmother Fitzgerald put her arms around me, she was like that big powder puff. You know, you ever see those big, she used dusting powder in those days, and she was that big powder puff, and she'd call me darling, and she'd put her arms around me, and I knew I was safe. You know, I told my mother, if I ever die, don't feel bad, but I've asked, if I ever die, I hope I wake up in Grandma Fitzgerald's bed, because I know I'll be okay. Because I'll wake up and think, oh my God, where am I? And Grandma will look at me and she'll say, don't worry, you're okay, it'll be okay. Because I used to wet her bed sometimes too when I was a little boy. And my uncle would be leaving for work, and I'd think, oh God, if he found out, he'll yell at me, and don't worry, darling, don't worry, it'll be okay. Anyway, so the reality is, you know, I gave it my best shot, you know, working and going to school. And, you know, I played with girls a lot. We had a lot more in common, and I was prettier than most of the girls. And I think all the boys just tormented me. I think they all wanted me. That's what happened, you know. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I think it's very important to figure out why you got here. And, you know, I could tell you a lot about growing up and whatever, but I believe my alcoholism started long before I found alcohol. I actually found alcohol in my 3rd year of high school. Drinking was not, are there any men that have little girls? I mean, or had them, little girls. I was that little boy because, I'm that good. Remember, I didn't realize it, but when I look back, I was a good little boy. I always had money in my pocket, and, I went to teen club and all that, and I'm that little boy and I had girlfriends. I actually had a girlfriend until after 19, and then I came out about being gay. But the reality, I was that little boy that come and get your daughter, and I'd bring the corsage to go to the dance, and I always had a few dollars in my pocket. I remember I only had one suit, but I was always clean. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was just a handsome little guy, and I was a short little guy for a long, long time, but I was that guy that would come and get your daughter, and I never knew why the parents were always so glad to see me. They were so glad to see me. The parents loved me. And the girls did too. But the reality is I would always say to the father, "Sir, what time would you like your daughter home?" And he'd look at his beautiful daughter, and he'd look at his beautiful wife, and he'd look at me and say, "You could keep her out all night." And I think, well, why would he say that? You know what I mean? And he'd say, "Well, do you need the car, or would you need some money or that?" And I'd say, "No, I'm fine." And I realized they knew their daughter was going to dance, because my first drug of choice was jitterbug dancing. That was my claim to fame. I found jitterbug dancing, and I became the jitterbug king of Bridgeport and the cha-cha king, and I was running with the group of rich Lithuanian girls, and I was the polka king, and it worked real well for a long, long time. The reality is something happened to me in the 8th grade, and that, I believe, was the beginning. If I would have known it then, but I didn't know it. I still had a long way to go. But in the 8th grade, I had my first male friend. I still remember where he lived. Donnie T. He lived in the Bridgeport Housing Project, not far from us. And I liked Donnie a little more than being a friend. That was the beginning of something was a little different, but nothing ever happened. But the reality is, in Chicago growing up, we had good girls, not so good girls, and we had real bad girls. And the only thing that I know, remember I play with girls all the time, the only thing that I knew how the girls that I could actually associate with, remember we all went to Catholic school, the good little Catholic girls, remember, no makeup, they didn't wear, and Mickey Bush, don't you follow me on Sunset Boulevard later. The good little Catholic girls, no makeup, believe it or not. They used to look like little nuns, you know what I mean? They would have their babushka on like this. Look, she's a good little Catholic girl, She could be my friend. And a girl that was not so good, now I don't know what's not so good was, but I knew she was a little bad. She would tie it in a knot and have it on her chin. And I knew she's a little bad, but she could still be my friend. And a real bad girl would actually have it back a little more, have makeup on, have her hair in a ponytail. I hope we don't have any ponytails in here tonight. But have her hair in a ponytail, and she have it tied in a knot in her mouth like this. And that was the early alcoholism. I would actually see a bad girl coming down the street. I don't know why then, but I learned later on, I was terrified of the bad girls. I thought somehow I was going to rub off or something. I was terrified of the bad girls. I would cross on the other side of the street. I learned a little later on in life, in my alcoholism, that I actually wanted to be a bad girl and do all the things they were doing and I didn't even know about. You know what I mean? So the reality is my friend Donnie wanted to make it with this bad girl, and her friend wanted me. And he said, "Joe, you got to do it." So I was willing to go to any length to be his friend, and we ended up in a junkyard one night in a bandit truck. The girls brought little candles, and I still remember, I'm a short little boy. I actually got this tall in second year of high school. And I remember going to that truck that night, looking up at that girl. That girl looked like the Jolly Green Giant. She was so big and so tall, and she was so excited to see me. She went running to the back of the truck. Donnie and his girlfriend stayed in the front of the truck. It was one of the slowest walks I have ever taken in my life. And by the time I got back there, they blew their candle out. I got somewhere near her, and she blew our candle out. And I knew what I was supposed to do. I started to prepare myself, and I could not see anything. And I thought, God, I've got to check it out and see what's going on in here. So I am low to the ground, remember, standing, and I just start feeling around that truck, and I touched something. It was a little furry, and I let out a scream. I said, "Oh my God, there's an animal in here," And the rest is history. We got dressed immediately. We exited the truck. Donnie went that way, those girls went that way, and I went that way, and I've never seen any of them since. You know what I mean? And that's when I found jitterbug dancing. And that was my first drug of choice, and it worked real well for a long, long time. And the reality is I eventually, met this group of guys that wanted to know this group of girls, these rich Lithuanian girls, and these guys, my girlfriend said, you know, those boys drink. And the girl said, we will have nothing to do with you unless you be Joe's friend. And they said, we don't have a problem with Joe. And they said, the girl said, you know, those boys drink. They drink beer. Could you drink beer? I said, well, I've had some sips. Drinking was not my thing. And they said, you know, those boys drink quarts. They drink 3 quarts. Do you think you could drink 3 quarts? I said, I'll try. We used to buy quart bottles in those days in brown paper bags. My friend John in 1959 had a black Chevrolet Impala 4-door, all red interior, stick shift in those days. And we would drive around Chicago. Now when I look back, when we would paint the interior lights red, and that car was, you know, it was unbelievable with those fins, and they were always polished, and it looked like a whorehouse on wheels with the red lights. And we all had a little buzz going, you know, and but the reality is I kind of fell in love with one of those boys. Nothing ever happened, but that was the beginning that something was a little different. And the reality is that whole thing kind of died. And eventually I dated my last girlfriend. I had dropped out of high school, but eventually I went back to high school and got my diploma, finished a year later. I was going to graduate in '59, but actually I graduated in 1960. And so the reality is I finally dated my last girlfriend. I came out on the streets of a park called, it used to be Rush Street in those days. It was real. I was thinking about this the other day, you know, being a hairdresser. Rush Street, we used to be out 2, 3, 4 in the morning. They had all the hookers and whatever, and the hair, remember, hair in the early 60s, it was this big. You know, I went to beauty school in the early 60s. I became a hairdresser. And the hairdos were unbelievable. And they had shops open all night because these girls would turn tricks and they'd come in and get their hair redone and whatever. But the reality is, I came out on the streets. I hustled this old man and I made $10. And you know, we got a motel. And I was 19 and gorgeous, and he probably was 25, and he looked old. And he gave me $10, and I thought, I'm out of here. You know, I went running out of that room with $10 and opened that door, and I thought, if this is what I have to do, they told me being gay, you become a hustler. I thought, if this is what I have to do, I'll be a free hustler. So I became a free hustler at Bug House Square. I was very popular. In fact, the hustlers got real tired of me, and I was there for quite a while. And eventually what they did, they took me to my first gay bar, was called the Front Page in those days, and I'll never forget it. I had the same feeling when I was 19 and went to the Front Page, and the same feeling when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous at 26th and Broadway, and I was 33 years old. Because I remember going down the stairs at the Front Page. I remember those doors opening. I remember walking in, and I thought, this is my home. And that's exactly the way I felt at 26th and Broadway when I was 33 years old, and I heard the first guy share at the podium. I thought, these are my people. I knew there was something there for me. And you know, and I just fell in love with bars and drinking and men, and it worked real well. And you know, for good alcoholics, we find another alcoholic. And I found Mr. Alcoholic. He was 5 years older than me. I met him when I was 21 or 22, and I throw him out, and we set up housekeeping, and we beat each other up and throw each other out of moving automobiles, and he'd always come back. And eventually we moved out here in '67, and I didn't tell him, but when we moved out here in 1967, I said there'll be no more physical violence. I got tired of fighting, and I had to go back to beauty school to get a new license. He had a high-powered job. He always never had a problem getting jobs, and he was very intelligent guy, book learning person. And the reality is, we lived on Brentwood, Barrington in Montana, and what I did in that relationship eventually is I walked out of it. I walked out of it in 1968. I left the cats, the furniture, the dishes. I ended up on 10th in Montana in a single apartment, and I could tell you that's where I was 27 years old, and that's where my alcoholism began. I believe I was always an alcoholic, but that's when my whole life changed. Within 1 week, because I'm running out of time. Oh my God, that chicken just my new chicken, by the way. Susie bought this. Oh my God, it makes me nervous. Within 1 week, when I ended up in that single apartment, my aunt came over. She brought 8 bottles of bourbon. I said, Aunt Helen, I hate straight booze. She said, you will acquire a taste. She brought me a little Waterford glass, and Aunt Helen left that night, and I thought that little Waterford glass now is not working because I spent a lot of time in the bathtub getting ready to go out and I opened the kitchen cupboard, and I had a 4-cup Pyrex measuring cup, and I thought, now that's good because I like a lot of ice. I like it cold. Quantity, not quality. And, and one thing about this class, I come to, I was already started. My friends came over that had migrated out here from Chicago. They brought me a rolling machine and marijuana. All happened that first week. Rolling machine and marijuana. I was already on Valium, Librium from the doctor. My friends brought me diet pills. I've never had a diet in my life. I said, what are diet pills for? I was good at following directions. They said, most of my friends were hairdressers. They said, you take these when we drive to Palm Springs. After we close all the bars, early Sunday morning, we drive to Palm Springs for a couple of days, and they keep us awake. And they worked real well, those diet pills and poppers. I said, what is this for? They said, amyl nitrate, it's for sex, dancing, and when you want that long hair of yours to fluff up a little bit. And, it did work real well, but it really fluffed. And I think you need a little, fluffing. Anyway, and the reality is, that's the way it worked, and if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, this is not normal. A little vodka on the rocks and bourbon on the rocks. And I was so out of it in that apartment sometimes, in that single apartment. That's when I started passing out. I'd find the door open. I was still getting ready. I learned and I didn't know I was an alcoholic, but I knew I didn't go out to have fun, and I knew I could not afford to go out and drink the way I did. So I stayed home, played my Edie Gourmet and Barbra Streisand records, and spent a lot of time in the bathtub. I had a fabulous time all by myself, smoking marijuana. I'd come to in that apartment. We had big ashtrays in those days, and I would come to in that single apartment, and I'd have like 5 new lit cigarettes. I think, oh my God, someone must be in my apartment. I didn't know. I was so out of it at the time. And no one was in my apartment. It's just that I forgot to light one cigarette. I'd light another and another. And, in the bathtub, I'd come to, an empty bathtub, no water. I was wet. Or I'd be on the floor wet, and I'd think, my God, what happened? Or find the door open. Or if you're a good alcoholic, it's only 10 o'clock at night, I can barely stand. I've only had 3, 4, or 5 of these, and I know I'm still getting ready to go out. He's not going to be ready for me until about 1:45, so I still got to get ready. And the reality is, I got chickens. I love chickens. And you fire that little broiler up in those days, and you open the broiler and you throw your chicken in. And if you're a good alcoholic, you throw it in the broiler. And if you're a real good alcoholic, you always pass out on the kitchen floor, and you always come to about an hour or 2 later, and black smoke is always billowing all over your apartment. That's not normal cooking. And my friends used to come to my apartment early Sunday morning. When the bars closed in West Hollywood in those days, when I lived in Santa Monica, they knew if they woke up at home early Sunday morning, they would never come to the beach, because we used to go to Will Rogers State Beach. So they would I wake up on a Sunday morning, I have 8 or 9 guys in my apartment. They bring their tricks, whatever. Let's go to Joe's place. Someone would sleep in the tub, on the kitchen floor, on my single bed, on the floor. I mean, I had men all over. And the reality is one thing, even though I was 85 pounds when I got here, I always cooked, thank God. And I remember one Sunday, unlike any other Sunday, I'd gone to Safeway, bought a 12-pound turkey, and I remember I didn't know what a blackout was really until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, but I remember fixing this turkey, and I remember my friend saying, Joe, let's go. And I came out of a blackout, and I had this stainless steel bowl full of dressing. And I thought, oh my God, what do I do with all of it? And the bird looked so small, so I got a rubber mallet. And I just started stuffing it in that bird in the front and the back, and I rolled them into the oven. They could care less if they ate, and we went off to the beach, and we had a fabulous time. We came back. We were all sitting. Now, remember, we've been at the beach all day. Long, narrow Formica coffee table. There were about 8 of us all. We sat on the floor, even if you had fabulous furniture. In the late 60s, early 70s, we were always sitting on the floor. We were always passing things and sharing things. And I remember if I squint my eyes, everything was just a little hazy. It was always that way. And we heard an explosion. And, and sounds were not real loud in the late 60s, early 70s. And I heard a poof, and I thought, I was so out of it, and I thought, oh my God, what is this? I heard it. It got my attention, and I thought, oh my God, what is it? And the next thing I know, the goddamn turkey come flying out of the kitchen. He landed on the edge of the Formica coffee table, and he slid in the middle. And I remember all my friends going, wow! And I thought, oh my God, this must be some kind of new bird. I guess we didn't have that red thing yet. I thought, well, this must just come out. Late 60s, early 70s, a lot of things happened. And remember, I was Aquarius too, by the way, so a lot of things happened. And I thought, my God, I better get up and get the plates and the silverware. So I got up, got the plates, silverware, napkin. We had a fabulous meal. He blew his ass off in the kitchen, all over the wall, the stove. But we had a great dinner, you know, and eventually what happened, I got my hairdresser's license. I moved to West Hollywood and, you know, bars and men and drinking and, you know, and that's just the way it was, you know. And finally, what happened is, you know, it stopped working. That's all I could tell. I could tell you a lot about drinking. I told you about, you know, passing out. Only I had fancier apartments, bigger furniture. I had a 73 Coupe de Ville by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the same things were happening. I had redecorated that apartment so many times. I had to buy new drapes, you know, that black soot from the chickens. And I had a big O'Keefe and Merritt stove, the last big stove I had in West Hollywood anyway. Was that I still remember passed out on the kitchen floor and coming to, and that black smoke was billowing all over. Out of that, I had to replace wallpaper and shutters and drapes and whatever. But the reality is my father died. He had retired out here. And if I forget to tell you, my father was sober the last year and a half of his life. He was drinking 7 days a week in Chicago. He said, Joe, if I retire in Chicago, I'll be drunk 24 hours a day. I'm coming to California. I know you're gay, and I want to be part of your life. And he said, your brother and sister are too busy raising their children. They don't have time for me. You will. And he came out here. He lived with me for 3 months. He got apartment at Park La Brea. He said he had a little bit of money in this now, and he said, Joe, he went somewhere for like a month, and he filled the refrigerator with booze. He said, get your a lot of my friends were either hairdressers or decorators, and he said, get your decorator friends. I want my apartment to look just like yours. I love your apartment. So he worked on a railroad. We went running over to Park La Brea on the 8th floor, and we decorated it while he was gone. He had butter yellow carpet and printed bedspreads and palm trees, oversized couches, a lot of mirrors, crystal chandelier. He came back. He was just at Oz. It looked so beautiful. In fact, he was the only man on the 8th floor on Burnside. The women were knocking on, Walter, Walter. They could not believe a man that worked on the railroad had such a gorgeous apartment. They would actually bring their lady friends over. Walter, let my lady, and their casseroles too. Walter, let my lady friend see your beautiful apartment, you know. And I'd call him, Dad, how you doing? Joe, I can't talk. I'm giving another tour of my apartment, you know. So anyway, to make a long story short, he died. He had a massive heart attack. He lived a year and a half. If God would have said, remember I told you a lot of suicide. If God would have said to me, it's either you or him, I would have went in his place because I felt my life was over with. It was spiraling down, but it didn't work that way. And he died. I had 8 more months of drinking. And when I told you, when I cried out that last time, I cried out to my dad. And I realized, I think my dad looked down and he said, you know, my son Joe's an alcoholic and he needs Alcoholics Anonymous. Let's give it to him. And I think it was a gift from my dad. And, you know, I jumped into AA. I'm the one that made that call. And I'm the one that, you know, I did not know anything about alcoholism. I still remember getting ready that Saturday. I did all my house. You know, I'm the only hairdresser, you know, I drank myself out of the hair business. I just couldn't deal. I'm the only hairdresser that went from doing hair in Beverly Hills to cleaning beauty shops. I love to clean. And we all like to clean in my family. And I went from doing hair. I remember I came out of a blackout one time. I heard this woman. I felt this swirling motion first. And I thought, oh, my God, we must be having an earthquake. And then I heard this woman calling me, Mr. Joseph, Mr. Joseph. And I came to and I had a brush in my hand. It was going around and around. And I thought, oh, my God, I'm in the beauty shop. And then I heard this woman saying, Mr. Joseph, my beehive is a little bit on an angle. I said, that didn't go over very well in the, you know, late 60s, early 70s, or late 60s anyway, early 60s. So I said, God damn it, don't worry about it. Just turn your head a little bit, you know. And they got tired of walking around like this, you know what I mean? So anyway, I said, I'm out of here. And I started cleaning beauty shops. And I went from cleaning beauty shops to cleaning for the rich, not so famous, and I've made a lot of money. I'm that little boy that I've always wanted better things. And, you know, I'm that little boy that when I got in AA, you know, I was doing very well before I got here, but I was dying and unsuccessful at suicide. When my father died, he left me a CD. Each 3 of us, he left us $8,200 in a CD. And he told me, he didn't know he was dying, but he said, if I ever die, you're going to get a CD. And he said, don't ever spend the principal. Only spend the interest because, Joe, you're going to be alone like me the rest of your life, and you need money. They're going to have their children. You won't have anybody. And he was right. You know, and the reality is when he died, I got that CD. I didn't need the money, but the reality is I got AA, you know, and my first meeting was 26th and Broadway. Donald Adam was the man that trusted me. I remember getting ready in that apartment. I hope I never forget it. And I was getting all dressed up. And I lived in an alcoholic building, 10 units in West Hollywood on Fountain and Harper. Out of 10 units, eventually 6 of us came to AA. You know, we were 10 single men. And we had keys. We used to leave our doors open, and we always drank, and we shared everything. And I remember getting dressed that day, and they came up. It was around 6:30. And I remember that was too early for me to be all dressed up. I was all dressed up, and I remember my friend saying, "My God, where the hell are you going?" You know what I mean? And I looked at them. They all had drinks in their hand, 3 of them. And I said, "I bet you'll never guess where I'm going." And they said, "You're the funny one in the building. You're always doing funny things. Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to an AA meeting." And they kind of looked at each other and said, "You really did it this time." And I thought, and they turned around and left, and I thought, oh my God, what did I do? I had second thoughts. I thought, maybe I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But you know what? I got my Cadillac. I drove over to Donald Madden. He had a beautiful home, and they call it Boys Town in that area where he lived. And I pulled in his driveway. I didn't know nothing about alcoholism, but the reality is he had a 75 Eldorado convertible. And I thought, oh my God, I had a 73 Coupe de Ville. And I pulled behind him, and I thought, a gorgeous home. And I thought, man, these alcoholics are doing pretty good. So I got out of my car. I rang his doorbell. I swear to God, he opened that door, and he looked at me, and he said, "By the way, we don't drink." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Do you do any other things?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, smoke funny cigarettes." "Oh, I do. I'm so grateful I was on it." I said, "Yes, I do." "Do you ever take pills?" I do." I said, "I smoke marijuana only on my way out of my apartment, because if I smoke it too soon, I'm still in the tub at 2:30 in the morning by myself." That's all he do. Diet pills, you know, driving to Palm Springs. Valium, Librium, doctor prescribed. Poppers, just sex, dancing, long hair, fluff up a little bit. And then he looked at me and he said, "You know, we don't do any of that either." And I thought, oh my God, I didn't know it was in the book. I wanted to say, what in order? I can't go through with it, you know what I mean? But the reality, I guess I was ready. That's all I can tell you. I got rid of it all. Thank God I lived in an alcoholic building. In fact, all my friends, they were so glad. I had a whole shopping bag, you know, a Galston's brown paper bag of marijuana. From Columbia. You know this, I used to work for this lawyer. She got it all from Columbia. Anyway, the reality is I jumped into AA. He said if you drank every day, you go to a meeting every day. If you had a commitment, maybe you go back. And, you know, I had a 73 Coupe de Ville, and a lot of people didn't have Cadillacs in those days. Not a lot of newcomers. And the reality, I had money in my pocket. Everyone wanted to go in my Cadillac. "Can I go in your Cadillac?" I started working at Westwood office, answering phones. I was 6 months sober, and I would answer those phones. And on Sunday night, our big meeting was Wilshire, Normandy, and I'd answer phones, and I'd say, "Oh, I got to get someone to come and get you." Remember, we had wet trunks in the old days, and they would say, "No, don't let anyone come and get me. You come and get me." And the reality is I went over and got them, you know, and I'd have like 4 or 5 alcoholics. They'd pile in my back of my Cadillac, and we'd go down Wilshire Boulevard, and a lot of armor all on those leather seats, no seatbelts in those days, and I'd go barreling down Wilshire Boulevard. I'd kind of make a turn, and that car was like 747. It would just kind of slant a little bit, and they would slide from one end to the other. I'd come up on a light. We had power brakes in those days. I'd hit the brake, and the back end would always kind of lift up, and they would just slide down. I remember looking in the rearview mirror. I thought, oh my God, the 4 alcoholics, they're gone. What, they must have fallen out the goddamn door. You know, no, they were all intertwined. 2 were under the dashboard, but with the reality is some of them are still sober. But anyway, I ended up in the Pacific Group. I don't know what you're going to have to do, but I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love being sober. And I am willing to go to any length to be sober. I was 16 months sober. I ended up in the Pacific Group. And eventually, you know, I moved out of West Hollywood. I went to my sponsor when I was almost 3 years sober. I said, "Clint, I got to get out of West Hollywood. Too many bars and all the men. I just got to get out." And he moved me to Venice. And a year later, he turned me over to an AA realtor. I bought that little AA house. I looked all over Venice. Unfortunately, a house came right around the corner from Clancy. I was the first openly gay person in those days. I remember looking over the fence. "Clancy, I'm your new neighbor. Hello!" Jesus Christ, how'd you get over there? I'm getting out of Venice, you know. But anyway, the name of the game, my time is over. But the reality is, if you have any trouble with God, I had a lot of trouble with God, being gay, ex-Catholic, whatever. Clancy, I went to the yard one Saturday, and he said, "You know, you have to play baseball, dummy." Clint Hodges was my sponsor, not Clancy. I couldn't deal with him. But the reality, he said, "I don't usually buy people gloves, but I bought you one. Put it on your goddamn hand and get away from me. I want you far away from me." And I thought, oh my God, he sounded like my father. He called me dummy in the old days. "Get out in right field, goddammit. Get out in right field." I went running out in right field. I turned around, "Clancy here." "No, keep going, keep going." I had a lot of hair and super Aquanet, you know, and all that dust and dirt. And I went running out, and eventually he would say, "Come a little closer, come a little closer." And you know, the name of the game is is, when I played baseball, I always had my eyes closed. I was terrified of getting hit by that goddamn ball. And if you cannot see a ball, try it someday. Close your eyes, balls whistle. I would hear the ball whistling through the air. I had so much hair and so much superrock in that when the ball came somewhere over me, it would create a draft. My hair would be lifted up a little bit. And I think, oh my God, the ball's coming somewhere near me. And they would go, it'd fly over my head. My hair would go up, down. I thought, it passed. You know, I'd open my eyes and go and chase the goddamn thing. 3 years later, I had a sore back from bending over, getting the goddamn ball. But one Saturday, unlike any other Saturday, I had my hand up, my eyes closed. I heard the ball whistling through the air. And this Saturday, I felt a little nudge in my glove, and I went, oh! Oh, my God. Oh, it almost knocked me over. It was so powerful. Bases were loaded. They were running real fast. Dust and dirt was flying all over. Clancy happened to be the pitcher that Saturday. And if you're a guy that used to live in West Hollywood, never caught a ball before, what do? I start jumping up and down saying, I caught the ball! I caught the ball! I was just beside myself. And I remember when the dust settled, Clancy, he had long hair in those days. His hair looked like a beehive. It was straight up in the air. His veins were breaking in his face. He yelled out, hey, dummy, when you catch the ball, you don't stand there and jump up and down and say, I caught the goddamn thing. Throw it! And I threw it with all my might. I gave him the old beauty shop shuffle. It was one of the slowest balls he ever waited for. God bless you, and thank you for having me. Thank you. How are you doing? Good to see you. Oh, thanks.